The night tasted of iron and ink. A seal split under a trembling thumb, and a name, Baruch, shivered across the page like a verdict. In that breath between the wax breaking and the words settling, a door shut and another, older, nameless, swung open. Amsterdam, 1656. I had been taught to search upward for a distant judge, a voice above clouds, a hand beyond the stars. But truth arrived without ceremony, not as thunder, not as fire, only as a stillness so complete it seemed to listen back. I felt it first at the water's edge, where the canal held the sky like a polished mirror, not a someone perched over creation, but the pulse within it. Not an elsewhere, but a here. God, not a separate monarch, but the very breathing of nature. Deus sive natura, the phrase would come later, after the exile, after the grief. The insight came first, clear as frost on glass. I lived by grinding lenses then, drawing clarity from rough circles, coaxing sight out of sand. The craft taught me what no sermon had. When the glass is flawed, the world looks punished. When it is true, the world looks true. My thoughts were the lenses. Some were chipped by fear, fogged by custom, warped by borrowed certainties. Others, rare, precise, aligned with what is, adequate and inadequate, two ways of seeing, two fates of a soul. Excommunication arrived like winter. They took from me a roof and a name among names. They could not touch the quiet that had already chosen my chest to dwell in. Loss can feel like a blade, yes, but sometimes it is only a garment torn away, a costume falling to the floor so the actor can breathe. Alone? I found I was not. Without a temple, I found I was standing inside one so large it had forgotten to build walls. If the divine is everywhere, it is also here, in the creak of the stair, the scratch of the quill, the grain of bread softening in warm water. I did not become a rebel. I became available. I stopped bargaining with heaven and began consenting to reality. And in that consent, a freedom I had not expected. Not the freedom to be right, but the freedom to be real. So tell me, if God is not apart from us, but within and throughout, what then is punishment but a misreading of light? The decree was loud. The presence was louder. I folded the letter. I stepped into the cold. Behind me a door closed. Before me the vastness nodded, as if to say, now begin. Not every voice in the chamber of the mind belongs to you. That was my first discovery in exile. I had imagined loneliness would mean silence, but silence did not come. Instead, 1,000 borrowed whispers crowded my skull, echoes from rabbis, parents, scriptures, merchants on the street, even the jeers of children. They spoke in my own tongue, but not with my own breath. One morning, hunched over a small wooden desk, I felt their chorus surge. This is useless. You will change nothing. You are alone. The words pressed like frost against the inside of a window pane. I closed the book, laid my forehead on the grain of the wood, and asked myself, where do I end, and where do they begin? Then clarity. Not all thoughts that arise are truly mine. Some are inherited wounds. Others are habits disguised as convictions. They pass through the mind like actors on a stage, demanding applause. But the stage is not the actors. The stage remains when the actors leave. That stage is the self who observes. I began an exercise, though I did not call it so then. Sit, breathe, and let each thought be a cloud. Some clouds are dark and swollen, some delicate and fleeting, but all drift if you do not clutch them. Watching them pass, I realized a secret that would later shape my philosophy. Freedom is not the ability to think whatever one wishes. Freedom is recognizing which thoughts need no longer be believed. In later years, I would write of affects, the passions that move us as if we were leaves in a storm. Anger, shame, pride, fear. They strike from outside, yet feel like they belong to us. But reason, by which I mean clarity of perception, is the anchor. When one perceives adequately, the storm still rages, but the roots hold. That day in Rainsburg, after walking under rain until my clothes clung heavy, I whispered to myself, "I am not what I think. I am the one who observes what I think." The sentence warmed me more than the fire I could not afford to light. So ask yourself, if not every voice inside is yours, then who is the one listening? If not every thought deserves obedience, what would remain if you set the false ones down? Perhaps in that remainder, you would meet the same presence I met. Quiet, steady, patient as the sky. The most unsettling encounter came not with an enemy outside, but with a figure I carried within. One night, sleep took me beside a dwindling fire. In dreams I saw a bent silhouette, its back twisted, its mouth muttering words I would never dare say aloud. I reached toward it, and in a violent instant it turned. Its face was my own. Not the calm philosopher I longed to be, but a me that seethed with rejection, shame, and hunger for approval. I woke gasping, heart pounding, the taste of bitterness still in my mouth. That night, I learned a truth none of my teachers had whispered. Shadows grow when ignored. I had spent years polishing virtue, cultivating reason, chasing purity, yet I had neglected the raw clay of my own humanity. Rage buried, grief unspoken, pride veiled as discipline, all of it had been fermenting in silence. To live as though these parts did not exist was to fracture myself. And fractured glass, as I knew from my trade, cannot form a clear lens. The soul too must be whole if it is to see truly. So I began, timidly, to turn toward this inner adversary. I did not justify it, but I acknowledged it. I asked not, "Why are you here?" but "What do you need?" The answer was not words, but a longing, simply to be seen. Later, I would recognize this in my philosophy as conatus, the striving of each thing to persist in its being. Even the shadow is an expression of that striving, only distorted. When it is met with compassion rather than denial, the energy locked inside returns to the flow of life. Perhaps this is why the sages of many traditions speak of embracing the serpent, the demon, the beast. They knew what I was only beginning to learn. The enemy within is not a monster to slay, but a wounded child to acknowledge. That winter, for the first time, I slept without nightmares, not because I had conquered my darkness, but because I had sat with it. Acceptance, I discovered, is the first act of genuine strength. So I ask you, what do you exile inside yourself? Which voice have you silenced so long that it has turned into a shadow? Remember, what you judge in yourself hides. What you gaze upon with compassion transforms. The void has a strange texture. At first it feels like ruin, a demolition of everything familiar. After my banishment, I believed emptiness was proof of failure. No synagogue, no family table, no companions to share bread or ideas. Yet as weeks passed, I began to see the void differently, like a house being carefully dismantled, brick by brick. Destruction was not the end. It was preparation for something new. I recall standing by the Amstel one gray afternoon, watching workmen tear down a wooden structure. Each strike of the hammer sent dust into the air. Each removed beam revealed sky where once was wall. And in that rhythm I understood. Space must be cleared before life can build again. A field must be plowed bare before seed can take root. Silence, too, was not absence but readiness. At first it scraped against my mind, desperate to be filled with voices or books. But when I dared to stay within it, when I resisted the urge to escape, I discovered a different presence, Silence itself became a teacher, one who asks nothing, demands nothing, simply waits. Mystics across traditions call this the via negativa, the way of negation. We learn what is sacred not by piling words upon it, but by stripping away illusions. The Buddhists speak of emptiness, the Christian contemplatives of the cloud of unknowing. Spinoza, the lens grinder, found the same lesson in the grinding wheel. You remove to reveal. I practiced a small ritual. Each evening I sat in a darkened room and gave myself 5 minutes not to read, not to write, not to pray, but simply to remain. The mind, restless as a horse, reared and kicked. Yet slowly, with patience, it began to tire, and in its quiet, a stillness surfaced, not void at all, but fullness unmeasured. The paradox unveiled itself. The void is not death but gestation. The soul does not fear emptiness. Only the mind trembles when it cannot cling to answers. And so I ask you, what would happen if you stopped trying to fill every silence? Might you hear a voice more ancient than thought, waiting just beneath the noise? Presence often comes dressed as absence. In the quiet of exile, I began to notice something uncanny, a sense of being accompanied, though no one entered my room. One winter afternoon, seated by a small window polishing a lens, I felt it rise behind me. Not fear, not shadow, but awareness itself. I turned. Empty air. Yet the sensation lingered like breath on my skin. At first I dismissed it as fatigue, but it returned. When the fire dimmed, when I walked the canal at dusk, when snow fell in slow, deliberate silence. It was not a figure, not a face. It was the texture of being with. I realized then that alone is a word the mind invents. Consciousness itself cannot be solitary, for it is the weave holding all things together. Imagine a vast lake. Each drop reflects the whole, yet each is still itself. So are we, ripples of one great consciousness. When I softened my gaze, when I let awareness expand beyond the skull, I felt the same current linking me to bird, to tree, to passerby, to the very frost glittering on the glass. The divine was not hidden. It was diffused, continuous, indivisible. This is why I stopped praying as if to a monarch in the sky. Prayer became attention itself, listening to the grain of wood, to the rhythm of breath, to the silence that breathes back. To live was to commune. Modern thinkers may call it a field, a network, an energy. I called it God or nature. It mattered little which name, for names divide what presence unites. What mattered was the recognition. You are not sealed inside your body. The soul is not a prisoner of flesh, but a note in a symphony too wide for one ear to catch. Have you ever felt it? That uncanny comfort in a hard hour, as if someone unseen placed a hand on your shoulder? Perhaps it was not imagination. Perhaps it was the whole reminding you. You belong. So I leave you this question. If the invisible is not absence, but presence without form, what happens when you begin to trust it? It was on a mist-heavy morning that the world spoke in a language I could not mistake. I wandered along the Amstel, my breath rising in pale clouds, when a black crow perched on a low branch caught my gaze. It did not flinch. It simply stared, unyielding, unblinking. Something in that silence unsettled me, as if the bird were not merely watching, but asking. Almost without thought, I whispered inwardly, "What do you want of me?" I returned to my room, chilled to the bone. On the table lay a letter without seal or name. Inside, only a single line. "What you are writing is necessary. Do not stop. No signature, no sender." Yet I knew. This was no accident of timing. The crow, the question, the answer, all strands of one woven fabric. From that day I ceased dismissing coincidences. Life itself was a script too subtle for reason alone to decipher. Call it synchronicity, call it providence, call it the whisper of nature. Names did not matter. What mattered was recognition. Reality does not shout. It arranges. It places a stranger's remark, a forgotten book, an unexpected visitor, precisely where it must be to nudge the soul. I began keeping a record. Each time an event returned 3 times, a phrase, a symbol, a sign, I marked it. Soon a pattern unfolded. The universe converses not through thunder, but through threads. To ignore them was to miss half the dialogue of existence. But there is danger, too. One can drown in false signs, chase shadows of meaning until reason collapses. The task is discernment. A sign that deepens clarity is a guide. A sign that stirs fear without light is merely noise. The true language of synchronicity always carries a resonance of peace, however strange its form. And so I ask you, have you ever dismissed the improbable as mere chance, when in truth it may have been the cosmos itself adjusting the mirror? Perhaps what you call accident is the universe leaning close, whispering, yes, this way. Opportunities sometimes knock gently, and we, out of fear, pretend not to hear. During my years in Rheinsberg, a letter reached me from the South. It promised recognition, steady income, the honor of teaching philosophy under a respected name. For a young exile, it was everything I had once longed for, yet the letter lay unopened on my desk for weeks, as if my own hand refused to move. Why? It was not that I lacked desire. Deep down, I believed I did not deserve it. Like the child I once saw in the market. His father held out a sweet. The boy's eyes glowed with hunger, yet he stepped back again and again, not because he did not want it, but because he felt unworthy of taking it. In that boy, I recognized myself. The greatest prison is not built of walls, but of self-image. For years I carried an old portrait of myself, the heretic cast out, the wanderer without name. And when life offered me a doorway, that portrait whispered, "Not for you." It was not the world that blocked me, it was the story I repeated about who I was. This realization marked a turning point. Freedom is not only resisting chains placed by others, it is laying down the rusted chains you fasten on yourself. To see oneself through an adequate idea, clear and unwarped, is to clear the glass once fogged by doubt. I began practicing a small exercise. Each day I received one small gift without protest. A kind word, a loaf of bread, a smile from a stranger. I let them in. By degrees, the soul learns to open. By degrees, the portrait fades, and the face beneath emerges. So I leave you this question. When life extends a hand, do you grasp it, or do you step back, whispering that you are not ready? Perhaps the barrier is not the door before you, but the story you still believe about yourself. Gratitude is not an afterthought. It is a force, a posture of the soul that shapes reality itself. I learned this truth not in abundance, but in hunger. One winter in Leiden, snow buried the streets, work was scarce, and the fire in my stove coughed its last embers. I wrapped the final crust of bread in cloth and sat by the window, expecting despair. Yet something unexpected flooded me instead. A strange lightness, as if the lack itself had stripped me of fear. In that bare moment, I remembered a line I had once scribbled without much thought. Gratitude is not reaction, it is creation. And suddenly I understood. Gratitude does not wait for blessings to appear, it summons them. It is not a response to good fortune, but the soil from which good fortune grows. The following morning, as if in answer, a neighbor knocked. He brought bread, wood for the fire, and a letter from a printer who had glimpsed my writings. Coincidence? Perhaps. But to me, it was coherence. When the soul aligns with trust, life arranges itself to echo that state. Gratitude was the tuning fork. The world vibrated to match it. I began a nightly ritual. Before extinguishing the lamp, I wrote 2 simple lines. Thank you for what is. Thank you for what is coming. Not as petition, but as alignment. In this practice, I discovered a paradox. To be grateful before receiving is already to have received. Even today, science affirms what I intuited then. Gratitude softens the nervous system, steadies the heart, opens pathways of resilience. But beyond science lies mystery. Gratitude makes the soul porous to grace, teaching it that scarcity is often only the shell around abundance. So I ask you, what might shift in your life if you began to thank the unseen as though it were already here? What door might unlock if gratitude itself became the key you carry at all times? Loss arrived not like a thief in the night, but like a slow erosion. The work that once sustained me began to corrode my lungs. Each breath turned to fire. Friends drifted away, not out of malice, but out of time, distance, and their own burdens. One by one, the pillars I leaned on collapsed. Community, income, health, even the illusion of belonging. I looked around and saw only a thin blanket, a borrowed bed, and a body faltering. Yet in that desolation, something unexpected revealed itself. I discovered that when everything external is stripped, what remains is not nothing, but essence. I could no longer cling to identity as lensmaker, as student, as member of a congregation. What remained was awareness itself. Quiet, persistent, indestructible. I once feared that loss would empty me. Instead, it clarified me. Like glass ground thinner until it becomes transparent, loss removes what is opaque. What it leaves is not a void, but a window. In that window, I glimpsed what I later called the amor Dei intellectualis, the intellectual love of God, which is nothing other than resting in the necessity of being, loving the order of things as they are. It is a paradox hard to accept. What seems like punishment may be unveiling. To lose the world's ornaments is to uncover the naked soul. To lose illusions is to discover what cannot be lost. And what cannot be lost is who we truly are. I remember fever dreams in which a voice whispered, "You cannot lose what you are, only what you no longer need." I awoke with tears, not of grief, but of recognition. Every fall had carried me closer, not farther. Every subtraction had been an invitation to see the sufficient. So I ask you, what if your losses are not theft, but unveiling? What if what has left you was never truly yours to keep? And what if, in the silence after loss, you hear for the first time the voice that never departs? Peace is not a prize at the end of the journey. It is the ground from which the journey begins. For years, I searched for it as though it were a crown to be earned, after knowledge, after recognition, after love. Yet the harder I chased, the further it drifted. Until one day, weary of striving, I closed my books, left my notes, and simply walked along the single canal. The water flowed without hurry. The trees mirrored themselves upon its surface without effort. Life moved, unbothered by my endless questioning, and there, on a damp stone, I sat. For the first time, I did not demand answers. I did not ask the world to bend. I only breathed. And into that simple act, peace entered, not as a concept, not as a reward, but as presence. I later called this practice the suspension of judgment, to let things be, without carving them instantly into good or bad, for me or against me. In that openness, the mind loosened its grip, and reality unfolded like a flower finally free of frost. Peace was not about solving the puzzle of existence. It was about ceasing to fight the pieces. When I stopped resisting, life itself became translucent. Even insult, even hardship, even silence carried within them a hidden harmony. From that day forward, I understood. Wisdom is not a sermon, it is a posture. Truth is not merely spoken, it is breathed, walked, lived. To write of God is beautiful, to live as though God saturates every step, every glance, every bite of bread. That is transformation. So when I laid down my pen for the final time, leaving pages unfinished, I did not feel failure. The words were incomplete, but the life had spoken. And if you have listened until now, let these reflections not remain as echoes. Do not merely repeat them, embody them, for the world doesn't change with borrowed words, but with living souls who remember who they are. The candle went out. Silence remained. And silence, I discovered, was enough.